Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo and the Fireteam Zero Showcase. This is the rules overview video, so we're going to go over the rules for the game as quick as possible, and this is going to be high-level rules. We'll talk about scenario-specific and interesting things that happen as we go through the gameplay and the playthrough, but this is going to cover the majority of the sequence of play and some of the major rules that we should be aware of. So, first thing to make mention of is the Recon Deck. Now, we didn't do this during this setup, and I should have, but I wanted to include this at the beginning of this video so that everyone understands how it's built. Very, very easy. Again, you go into your mission briefing book. You're going to go ahead, flip to the area where it talks about the mission objectives. It's also going to mention the Recon Deck here. Right below it is what you want to be focusing on. It says Ferry Fuel Discovery and Engine Propeller Discovery. Those are the two discovery cards you need, and then it says 10 random events to make the Recon Deck. When you find the Recon Deck in your game, it's going to look like this. And the event deck and discovery are both made up inside of that Recon Deck. So you want to split them out so you have events here, discoveries here. Discoveries are scenario specific, and we'll talk specifically about situations that are happening in a particular mission. Events are very random and can happen across any of the missions, but you're going to grab a bunch of them and throw them in. So for this particular mission, we need to have the engine, propeller, and ferry fuel as the two discovery cards. So we're going to take both of those. And then we just need essentially 10 random event cards. So I'm just going to go ahead, flip this over, split it in half so you guys know that I don't know what exactly is going to happen when we go through the playthrough, which will be fun. And we're going to make up this deck. So we're going to go ahead and make this 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The reason you need 12 cards total in the Recon Deck, so this is 2 discovery cards in this particular case, and other missions might be different, and then you fill out the rest up to 12 with the random events. The reason you have 12 is because there are 12 spawn points on the map. I shouldn't say spawn points, but, well, they are actually for the enemies, but they are more so searchable recon areas of the map. So there's 12 of them, you need a card for each one. I'm going to shuffle this deck off camera in the next video, or before the next video, I should say. I won't worry about that in this one, but I just wanted to explain to you how that deck is built. So let's get right into the rules overview, talk about a few things kind of high level first, and go forward. So the first thing I want to talk about is the sequence of play. So this is really, really important. So the first thing, the sequence of play is... Fireteam Zero is played out through a series of game rounds, like most games, each consisting of 3 phases. The tactics phase, which is when heroes draw new cards and have the option of playing a tactical response if they so choose. And again, that's 1 tactical response across the entire group if they so choose. The hero phase comes next, when each hero may move across the board and perform actions. And then the threat phase, when the monsters move and attack. And of course, new monsters enter the board. The ones that have been killed off will come back. And then the ones that are not part of the side pool. And then this can result in new game-changing disadvantages for the heroes in terms of the threat track also advancing. So when the threat track advances up this pool, it'll go from 1 and go all the way around. It could hit potentially a twist, which is going to cause alternate bad things to happen for the heroes. So what are we going to talk about first? Let's go right to the tactics phase, because that's the very first one. So in the tactics phase, you're determining your first player, which we've already done. So the first time you ever play this game, you don't have to worry about that because you've already determined your starting player before that round begins. So ignore that step there, but in every prior round, the player who's currently holding the star player token just passes it to the player on his left. Then next up, you play a tactical response if you so choose, but it's always skipped in the first round of the brand new scenario game that you're playing. So we're going to skip that right now. But in previous or later scenarios, when you actually have a hand of cards, because you don't have a hand of cards yet, then you're going to go ahead and do that. So that's essentially, those 2 steps I just mentioned are going to be completely skipped during the beginning of the game. So that's something to keep in mind, at least. All right, so next up is the major event that happens in the tactics phase, and that's drawing cards. So once any tactical response has been resolved, or a group decision has been made not to play one, each player who did not play a tactical response may draw sufficient action cards from his action deck to bring them up to a hand size of 5. You'll notice over here I've got 5 cards already drawn for each of the 3 decks. They're sitting on top kind of on an angle. So I've already pulled those 3. My very first character is going to be Abe, so we're going to take a quick look at his cards. So we've got his cards out here. I'm not going to go through too much explanation, but I'll just explain quickly what you're seeing. The top left corners of each of the cards has the range that particular attack can actually involve. Every single top half of the card is an attack and can be used as an attack. You can use it for a range of 1 on this one. This one has to be used in the same spot because it's only a range of 0. It's a melee attack. And of course, down below shows you what type of symbols you're looking for on the dice, as well as how many dice you're rolling when you make that attack. So if you do a pump action shotgun attack, it's obviously going to be going with bullets. You need 2 dice, which is 2 white dice. You'd roll them. And then depending on how many bullets you get, that's the amount of damage that you do. So 2 damage. So that's that. You can play cards individually, 1, or you can actually combine cards that have a similar symbol in terms of their attack. So I can actually take, say for instance, 2 knuckle dusters, put them together, and now I'm rolling 4 white dice looking for fists. It gives me a way better chance of putting damage up. The only downside is, now that I got 4 on that one, I'm losing 2 cards on that attack instead of 1. There is a hand management thing going on here where essentially you need to be sure that even when you spend your cards for attacks, later on, for instance, and of course you're only doing 1 attack per round, so let's say I had done the knuckle duster one where I paid 2 cards to do that, leaving me with 3 cards. If I was to ever get hit for 4 damage, say, I would only have 3 cards in my hand. This would actually knock me down and knock me out. That's where the hand management comes in. It's like, it's not just about what you're using for attack. You also have to have enough cards in your hand to handle hits when necessary. So again, if you get hit for 3, you just throw your 3 cards away and you're still fine and standing up and good to go. But if you get hit for 4 and you don't have enough cards to actually expel or to discard essentially in order to handle that, then you get knocked down, and on top of the knockdown effect, the major coin in the game gets flipped from the head side to the tail side. It sounds pretty minor, but it's actually humongously major. When that head side flips over to the tail side, you are 1 mistake away or 1 knockdown away from death. So essentially the next knockdown that occurs, if it's on the tail side, is an instant death. That means, or an instant loss of the entire scenario. So something to really keep in mind. You don't want to mess that up. And again, there are game effects that will allow it. So if you were to get knocked down early on, there are certain game effects that allow you to bring the coin back to the head side. So keep that in mind. It's not the end of the world. Okay, so that's the hand talk. So let's get past that and move on. All right, so the very first thing that you do after you've drawn your cards now is you go ahead, like we did, dig through them, find out what combinations you want to use, and then you're moving into your hero phase. So now at this point, you're going to go right ahead with the person who has the start player token. So in this case, Abe. Abe is right here. He would be going first. And the first thing you do on the hero turn is to move. So when you move, you have 2 movement always. Unless you have some ability that it provides more movement, it's always 2. So one thing to keep in mind in terms of movement is when the hero moves, he can use up to 2 movement. He can break up his actions and then move. So he can do like a movement, then an attack, then a move again. But you have to respect your terrain around you. So in this case, we've got some difficult terrain that are signified by these orange icons. So they cost 2 movement to move into, whereas normally if you're moving into something like this, it's just 1 movement. So if he wanted to spend his 2 free movement, he would go to here, he's done. He can't break up his movement because he needed 2 to get in here in the first place. Whereas if it was his second turn and he went here, this is only 1 movement. And then so that would allow him to go 1 more. He wouldn't be allowed to enter difficult terrain because he doesn't have 2 movement to enter in either of these, but he could go over here. So the reason I mentioned the breaking up of the movement, if he happened to be here at the beginning of his turn, he could actually move into this location, do an action in terms of attacking, searching, whatever, and then move again. So that's where the breaking up thing matters. So there's a little bit of tactics there in terms of how you move about the board. So that's the movement piece. The one thing to talk about in terms of movement that's really important is, like I said, these spots. So difficult terrain is an increase of 1 in terms of movement. You've got yourself terrain, which is called cover terrain, and any ranged attack targeting a location identified as cover terrain has its attack strength reduced by 1 die. So really, if an enemy is attacking you from range into this location, they lose a die on their attack, which is awesome. So very strategic. The other thing is elevated terrain. That would be terrain that looks like this. This terrain actually gives you an advantage, and you increase your die by 1 if you're attacking a non-elevated location with another enemy. So that's really cool. So elevated positions are really good. Impassable terrain is something like this. So this means basically no enemy, like no monster can move into it, and no actual hero can move into it. It's an impassable terrain area and is marked like that. So that's pretty much it in terms of the movement side of things. The next thing that I want to talk about, probably outside of movement, is attacking, because that's really the next major thing you're going to do on your turn. But just before we go into that, let's talk a little bit about the specialists that are coming along for the ride. So when you're doing your movement, normally, now you really want your specialist to be near you. The reason being is that in this case we have Patrick and we have Henry, both of which have special abilities and affect individuals who are close by. So if you happen to be within range 1, you get this ability that says you may reroll 1 attack die when you perform an attack. Very useful. You got to be within range 1 though. So just some things to note about guarding specialists though is when you move your hero out of a location containing 1 or more specialists, so in this case I've got 2, any hero moving, you can choose at that point to bring any or all the specialists along with you if you wish. If yours is the only hero in that location, you have to bring any specialists with you. You may never choose to leave them without a hero to guard them. So in other words, he can move freely out and he can move to here and say, I don't want to bring a specialist. Then maybe he could go, you know what, I'm going to move to here and I'm going to bring this specialist. And then this individual could activate and go, I'm going to move here and not bring the specialist. That's an illegal movement. You have to bring the specialist. You cannot leave it behind because specialists can't move unless a hero brings them. And of course, if you do this, you'd have left your specialist out in the middle of nowhere and he's going to get killed. So it's just a game mechanic to say you have to be bringing your specialist along with you for the ride. And you're going to want them because they're going to give you advantages. It's more so about strategically placing them to give you an advantage for all of your heroes is really what you're trying to do. And also ensure the monsters don't kill them. All right, so fleeing is next. And I shouldn't say kill them, but just you want to keep them, you want to guard them essentially. Fleeing, so you may not normally move out your hero out of a location which contains more monsters than active heroes. So that's pretty obvious. So if I was here, I couldn't just jump out of this location because there's more enemies than heroes. This restriction applies only to normal movement, deriving from your speed and made during your own turn. However, any special one-time moves, such as those granted by an event, a reaction, or tactical response, are not restricted by the presence of monsters. So there could be something crazy in the game effects that could happen that would actually pull you out. But that's the only time it can happen, not when you willingly choose to do so during your move. Okay, so on your turn, your hero turn, what's the major things you're doing when you're attacking? So let's say hypothetically we had Abe here, who we landed to this location. We take a quick look at his cards, and you also notice we talked about the action, which was the top half of the cards. You also have a bottom half of the cards, which can be used as a reaction at any point in time. They're going to have special abilities. So this one says, play before a minion or elite attacks to prevent it from attacking. Take 1 unblockable damage. So those reaction cards make these cards really unique because you have to decide when's the right time to play them, and you have to play reaction cards as they're stated. You cannot just make them up and play a reaction just to play it. It has to be used for its bottom portion. It'll show a range if the range actually applies. It'll also talk about which monster it's affecting and stuff like that, so you want to keep an eye on those things. But again, you're spending cards in your hand, which is slowly depleting how much defense you have in terms of taking damage, so something to keep an eye on. Now, if we're talking about attacks here, and Abe was to move with his 2 movement to get into difficult terrain, he did this. He'd then go to his cards to try to figure out what kind of attack he wants to make. He's got enemies over here kind of to the southeast. He's got enemies over here to the northwest. So what does he want to do? Well, he wants to make an attack. So the best way to do that is range, because right now he's not in a spot with monsters, so a melee attack is useless. He needs something with this range attack. So he could actually, if he wanted to be absolutely ridiculous, now this would be extreme overkill, and this is where you have to make decisions. You can combine an attack across 3 cards, as we mentioned. So I could roll 6 dice looking for bullets, and this individual, based on its card, the Corrupted Animals, needs 2 damage to die, but has 1 resistance to bullets attack. So basically you can handle 1 bullet before the rest go through. But rolling 6 dice, chances are I will easily accomplish that. So then it's kind of like, okay, that's probably not smart to use that many cards in the attack. Let's try 2. It's more of a guarantee and less of a danger to my health later on. So this is you just go grab your 4 dice total, and you're doing, it's again, range 1 away, so everything's valid. You roll your dice and you add up all your bullets. I got 4. Well, if we take a look at his card, he's got a resistance of 1, that would take 1 away, so 3. But his total health is 2, so 3 beats 2, and that would mean that we have actually successfully shot him off with a pump action shot rifle, or shotgun I should say, and both of these cards would be discarded, but hey, we killed the monster. Very cool. So then you continue on going to your turn. At this point, if I had any movement left, I could continue to move, but I don't. I used it all, so that would be the end of his turn. He'd be done if I chose to do an attack action. All right, so that's an attack action. The other thing you can do on your turn is called a search action. If your hero occupies a location containing a face-up spawn token, which is something like this. So say, for instance, this monster wasn't here, and he was here. You can only ever search when there's no monsters there. So if he happened to be in this location or get there, this is a searchable location or spawn token, you can use an action to search it. And when you do so, you turn the token. So in this case, there you go. You're kind of lighting it up. And again, you can choose to do it either way. You can choose to have it lit and kind of snuff it out, or you can do it the opposite way. I don't think the game really says which way is the correct way. I prefer to light the fires and torches as I go. So again, you flip this thing over, and then you go ahead and you grab a card from the Recon deck that we built. And we just go over here, we grab a top card off the Recon deck, and resolve its effects. It could be something to help with us completing our objectives as we need to get a recon, or sorry, intel in order to complete an objective, or it could be an actual event that hurts us. That's where it gets interesting, so it's not always a positive. So that's basically searching and attacking. And again, remember, you can only do in your turn your movement and then and you can do an action. So that means either searching or either attacking, not both. All right, so that's that. We'll put all these guys back to where they were and continue on, because I think we're getting close to the enemy's turn here, which is really cool. So let's talk about that. Now, the only two other things I want to make mention of, because we already talked about completing objectives. The major thing with completing objectives, as we mentioned, was discovery cards, finding them in the Recon deck. If you find Recon discovery cards, we would be putting intel tokens every single time, like so, on this card every single time we get one, as long as the actual Recon card specifies to put it on there. Some of them don't actually, you won't find them in the Recon deck. Some of them actually state right on the objective, if a monster is killed in Henry's location, an attack inflicting no more than 1 excess damage, place an intel token on this card. So you have to do that in order for an intel token to be placed on this card, and you'd need 3 of them. You have to do it 3 times, acquiring 3 different specimens before this is considered done. So keep an eye on that left-hand side of these objectives, because you need that many intel tokens to complete them. It's not always just a one-time solve. Okay, the other thing that's going to happen, guys, when you're playing through the game is ambushes. Those are really nasty. So if a Recon card, which is coming from this deck, happens to tell you that you've been ambushed, you spawn the monster in your location and activate it right away. You take that monster from the spawn pool if possible. If it's not possible, you look at all of the monsters on your board and you take the one that's furthest away, which in this case would be way over there, and you put that into your area instead. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the hero turn overall. There's also rules for bosses, which I'm not going to really talk too much about, but essentially involves a lot of these kind of tokens right here. So these tokens essentially get put on top of bosses based on how many heroes are in play, and they essentially will help to scale the boss to the number of heroes to ensure that the boss can stand up to the number of heroes you've chosen, right? So there's a scaling thing there. You can check that out in the rules. I don't believe there's any bosses in the first scenario, but as we go forward, there probably is. So I'm gonna I'll let you guys explore that when you actually play it yourself. There's no point in talking about it here because it's more specific to a situational attack or a situational part of the game. So let's move on from that. Let's go to the threat phase. All right, so the threat phase. The first thing you do in the threat phase, you advance your threat token. So threat token is going to move up the track. Eventually, when you do this, it's going to hit this area right here, which says draw first twist. And at that point, you're going to your twist deck, which we created way back, throwing a card right up here for first twist. And from there, things get nasty. They'll continue to do so as you move up the track. Once you get to the end, it just stays at the end and you never have to bother doing that. It's not a timer. Once it gets to the end, it doesn't mean the game's over. You just continue on and you never have to move that down the track any further, and there won't be any more twists after that. But I can tell you, with that many twists on the board, things are probably already ugly if you've got 4 in play. So you want to try to solve or complete your objectives as quick as possible. Time is of the essence. So in the threat phase, what are the major things to do? So we already advanced the threat token. That's awesome. This is, again, the enemy's turn, by the way. Second thing you do is activate monsters. So you're going to take a look at your monsters and go, okay, well, we've only got one on the board. It's the corrupted animals. We got a ton of them. If there are any elites in play that are specified as elites, then you go ahead and activate those right away. We have a corrupted human who's listed as an elite, but he's actually in a side pool that's not part of the major spawn. He's way up there on the top. So he actually, nothing's going to happen with elites because he's not even on the board. But if he was, he'd activate first. In this case, we're going to be going for the corrupted animals, which are the minions. We've got a whole bunch of them. Doesn't matter what order you do them in, you just choose your minion and go forward. So we can activate this one, for instance. We go ahead and actually decide for him to make his movement. So the first thing you do is your movement. So you take a look at your corrupted minion, your corrupted animal, sorry. Take a look down here and it says 2 next to the movement icon. Below it, it shows the number of dice they're going to roll and what attack it's going to be doing. So this animal is going to be using bullets essentially as its target, and it's going to use 2 dice. So it'd be rolling 2 white dice and rolling for bullets so it would have landed 3 total if it did an attack against me. And you can see 3 total would have worked out perfect because I left three cards in Abe's hand, and Abe being the first player that went. If this monster had particularly, because as you can see here, is not a, there's no range on this guy, so he needs to be in the same spot. So the first thing that would have happened is he would have moved. So he activates, he moves 1, and then into here. And then once he's into this area, and this is another thing to keep mention of in terms of the difficult terrain, monsters are unaffected by difficult locations and may move into them freely. So monsters can run straight through. So he has 2 movement right to me. So this does not matter. He would get here, he would have rolled a 3. The 3 bullets would have inflicted against Abe, because Abe was the first player token and went first in the round. But the great thing about that, remember when we did our thing, is we kept 3 cards in our hand, so he would still be alive and not knocked down. Thank goodness. But if I had played 3 cards, he would actually get knocked down right away. So you can see how quickly things can go south. So the one thing to remember too is there's some range beside it, so it'll tell you whether or not the attack that's being made is done by range. The other thing not to forget is after you move, the first thing you do, so let's go back a step here so you guys understand this as well, because I don't want to lose you in the shuffle in terms of the attack. But basically when the attack is done, or you're doing your movement, so this monster would activate, he'd move 2 into this location. Then you go ahead and you roll your activation die, and you do this activation die before you attack. So, like I said, starting off, activate this minion, 1, 2, roll your die. I got a blank, nothing happens. If I had have landed the trophy symbol, then you come over here, take a look at that trophy, and it says the attack range is increased by 1. So that would mean that the range of the attack is increased by 1. You have to keep that in mind when making the movement and attack. So in other words, he may make the attack from range instead of getting up close, that type of thing. If he happens to land on this particular symbol, it just means he gets an extra movement. So basically these guys, instead of moving 2, could move 3, which means they can really get across the board. Like someone like this, if he rolled and got the movement, he could go like 1, 2, 3, or he could go 1, and you're allowed to cross diagonally, which is insane, 2, 3, and he could be all the way over here already. That's insane. So stuff to keep in mind, how quickly these guys can move around with that monster activation die. Third thing they do is attack. We already talked about that, so it would have inflicted the damage that we rolled from the dice. That's it. And that's it. You basically got to go do that for every single monster on the board, and then that is done, and you finished your entire thing. Now, the other thing you can do is when a bunch of people are in the same location, or heroes targeted for an attack, any other active hero in the same location may voluntarily intercede, becoming the new target for the attack. So if somebody is likely to get hit and doesn't have many cards, someone can say, I'll take that hit. So there is a little bit of like jumping in front of your friend to try to save him, which I think is really cool. And that's pretty much it. That's the major, obvious, high-level rules of Fireteam Zero. And I'm really looking forward to getting into this in the playthrough, guys. I hope you guys will be just as excited as I am. I'm really looking forward to it. We've got we've got a lot of work to do at the beginning. We're gonna have to do a lot of attacks to keep ourselves clean from all the enemies, but I think it's gonna be really a lot of fun. And the first thing we're going to do in the next video is go through the mission briefing, which is a recorded briefing. I think it's going to be really interesting to listen to. And then from there, we're going to go into the playthrough. It'll be awesome. So hopefully you'll join me, and I will see you in Fireteam Zero. So as always, thanks for watching, and keep on rolling solo.